Let's be honest, an ALS diagnosis is one of the toughest things a person can face. And right behind the medical journey is this huge financial weight. It can feel just as overwhelming. But what if I told you there are ways to dramatically cut that cost? Today, we're going to break down some clear, real-world strategies to manage the cost of ALS care. We're talking everything from those six-figure prescriptions all the way down to daily supplements. So let's dive right in.
Here's our game plan for today. We'll start by looking at the high costs head-on. Then, we'll get into the details of prescriptions and supplements. And, most importantly, we're going to cover some really powerful ways to save on both, before we wrap it all up with your own financial action plan.
You know, the financial reality of ALS can be a real shock. It's a heavy subject for sure, but really understanding the size of the challenge, well, that's the absolute first step to getting it under control.
Which, of course, brings us to the biggest question of all, right? How can you and your family actually manage these insane costs without compromising on care? The good news is you can. There are solid, effective strategies that can make a massive difference.
To make this all feel a little more real, we're going to follow the story of a woman named Sarah. She's a 40-year-old teacher who is navigating these exact challenges right now. Her experience is really going to highlight just how much of an impact these saving strategies can have.
All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty, starting with what's usually the biggest expense for most families, prescription drugs. These medications are absolutely vital for slowing the progression of ALS, but wow, their price tags can be just astronomical.
$170,000. Let that sink in for a second. That's roughly the annual cost for a key ALS drug called edaravone, also known as Radicava. I mean, that's a jaw-dropping number for any family.
And that's not a one-off. For folks with a specific gene mutation, another drug, Qalsody, comes in at around $158,000 a year. Numbers like these are exactly why finding savings isn't just a nice-to-have, it's an absolute necessity. So let's look at the main players all in one place. You've got Riluzole, which has been around the longest and helps slow things down a bit. And then you have the heavy hitters we just talked about, edaravone and Qalsody, with those huge price tags. This is the financial landscape we're dealing with.
Okay, we've seen the problem. Now let's talk solutions. This is where we get into the really powerful, practical stuff that can bring those unbelievable costs way, way down. This is where you start to take back some control.
The single most powerful first step, go generic, always. Just look at the difference for Riluzole. The brand name, Tiglutic, can run you over $10,000 a year. The generic, you can find it for under $1,000 with discounts. That is a 90% savings right out of the gate. It's a no-brainer.
And listen to this. This is a huge deal. For anyone on Medicare, the Inflation Reduction Act is a total game changer. Starting in 2025, it puts a $2,000 cap on what you have to pay out of pocket for your prescriptions for the entire year. For someone looking at costs in the hundreds of thousands, this is just monumental relief. You know, even simple tools can make a massive difference. Let's check back in with Sarah. Her monthly copay for generic Riluzole was $200. But by using a free discount app like GoodRx, she knocked that cost down to just $30. $30! That's a savings of over $2,000 a year just from a quick search on her phone.
Okay, for those really expensive brand-name drugs like Radicava and Qalsody, patient assistance programs, or PAPs, are absolute lifelines. I know the process might seem complicated, but it really boils down to 3 simple steps. First, you find the right program, then you gather your documents, and then you apply. And you don't have to do it alone. Your clinic's social worker is usually an expert at this stuff. These programs can literally cover the entire cost. So, we've talked about prescriptions, but let's shift gears a little, because there's another whole category of expenses, over-the-counter supplements. Now, they're not nearly as expensive, of course, but those costs really add up, month after month. They're a really important piece of the whole financial puzzle.
A lot of doctors will recommend different supplements to help support the body while it's under the stress of ALS. You're usually looking at essential vitamins like B, C, D, and E, then antioxidants like NAC, and anti-inflammatories like omega-3s. Of course, and this is super important, always talk to your doctor before you start taking anything new.
So, how do you keep those monthly supplement costs from getting out of hand? Honestly, it just comes down to being a smart shopper. Let's walk through a few simple tricks that can easily cut your supplement bill in half. The game plan here is pretty simple. First, always go for store brands instead of the big name stuff and buy in bulk when you can. Next, if you have an HSA or an FSA, use those pre-tax dollars. It's like getting an instant 20 to 30% discount. And finally, if you have a Medicare Advantage plan, see if it has an over-the-counter benefit. It could be worth hundreds of free dollars a year for these exact items.
Whew. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground, from those sky-high drug prices all the way to monthly vitamins. Now it's time to pull it all together into an action plan that puts you firmly in control.
So what's the bottom line here? When you start combining all these strategies, generics, assistance programs, smart insurance use, savvy shopping, the potential annual savings are just massive. We're talking anywhere from $50,000 to over $150,000. This isn't about pinching pennies. This is about fundamentally changing the financial reality of living with ALS.
So we've looked at the challenge, but more importantly, we've looked at the solutions. The power to make these changes is right there in your hands. So the only question left is this one. After everything we've gone over, what is the very first step you're going to take today to start saving?